Marcus Garvey, an icon of Black pride, liberation, and empowerment. His legacy remains unmatched. Yet today, we are faced with an insult to his honorable name, President Biden's offer of a pardon. Let's be clear, anything short of exoneration is a disservice to his legacy. A pardon simply doesn't measure up. A pardon is the president's expression of forgiveness. It's often granted in recognition of the applicant's acceptance of responsibility for the crime and evidence of good conduct over time. But here's the key. A pardon does not signify innocence. It forgives the crime. It does not erase it. Marcus Garvey was innocent. He was not a criminal. He was a victim of a system designed to crush Black leaders who dared to empower their people.
Marcus Garvey argued that it was time to give Africa back to Black people. Some said it was a ridiculous fantasy, but Garvey's slogan, "Africa for the Africans," reverberated around the world as his movement spread through the colonies. In Europe, Garvey began to be seen as a threat.
The United States had worked with the British government during World War I, and they continued that after World War I with a focus on Garvey, because the British government was deathly afraid that the Garvey movement was going to spread revolution. They feared the hundreds of thousands of the masses of Blacks under his influence. And undoubtedly, Garvey did stir up nationalism.
Garvey's Negro World, now published in Spanish, French, and English, carried news of rebellion around the world. In Africa and the Caribbean, colonial authorities banned the newspaper. But with over 500 divisions of the UNIA in 22 countries, Garvey's message could not be stopped. In the United States, Black troops returned from World War I with high expectations for change. But they returned to a country that was not ready for equality, a country increasingly suspicious of radical political movements. In this unsettled climate, Garvey's appeal to disgruntled African Americans with military training sounded an alarm.
Attorney General Palmer decided that there needed to be a special division of the Justice Department. He called it the General Intelligence Division.
A pardon asks us to believe that Marcus Garvey was guilty and needed forgiveness. But let them keep their pardon. Marcus Garvey's legacy does not need their approval. Garvey's trial was a sham. The so-called justice system of that time was a tool for white supremacy, designed to keep Black people in poverty, unorganized, and under control. Rigged evidence, false witnesses, bias at every level. How many wrongful convictions have we seen? Marcus Garvey was no different. He was targeted because he was powerful, because he was a threat to the status quo. Let's clarify something. Being found guilty is not the same as admitting guilt. A court's guilty verdict is often no more than a guess, especially in a system riddled with racism. Until you admit guilt, you are not guilty, and Marcus Garvey never accepted guilt because he was innocent. So why is President Biden offering a pardon now? Let's not be naive. This does more for Biden's legacy than for Marcus Garvey's. A pardon positions Biden as magnanimous, while reducing Marcus Garvey to someone seeking forgiveness. But Garvey's work speaks for itself. He owes no one an apology. Did you know Marcus Garvey was targeted by J. Edgar Hoover, the same man who would later lead the FBI's campaigns against Black leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X? Hoover used his first Black agent, a Federal Bureau agent, to betray Garvey. Yes, the same acronym, FBA. Coincidence, perhaps? But the parallels are chilling.
And he picked a young Justice Department attorney. He was really unknown at that time, but must have been known enough for his diligence, and his name was J. Edgar Hoover. Garvey really gets pinpointed. Hoover, the Justice Department, were clearly hooked on a fixation on Garvey, which would before long become a vendetta.
J. Edgar Hoover wrote to a colleague, "Garvey is a notorious Negro agitator, affectionately referred to by his own race as the Negro Moses." Hoover's agents were in the audience at Carnegie Hall when Garvey bragged that the UNIA would soon be strong enough to exact its own form of justice.
When those crackers lynch a Negro below the Mason-Dixon line, since it is not safe to lynch a white man in any part of America, we shall press the button and lynch him in Africa.
The agent reported that Garvey's address was met with great applause and much excitement. J. Edgar Hoover had long relied on casual informants, but now, in his determination to go after Garvey, Hoover hired the first full-time black agent in the Bureau's history.
He was known by a code number. All his reports were signed 800. That was his code. And his job was to go into Harlem and to infiltrate the Garvey movement, to try and find evidence that could be used to build a legal case for ultimately getting rid of Garvey.
Marcus Garvey stood for black empowerment. He built the Universal Negro Improvement Association, created economic opportunities, and inspired millions to see themselves as kings and queens. He was a man of integrity, vision, and pride. Garvey didn't need a pardon then, and he doesn't need one now. Let us honor Marcus Garvey's legacy by demanding exoneration. Not a pardon. Exoneration clears his name, recognizes the injustice, and restores his honor. Anything less is an insult. Marcus Garvey's life was about uplifting us, not seeking approval from the system that oppressed us. Marcus Garvey was our leader, our visionary, our hero. Let's stand for him as he stood for us. Exoneration, not pardon, is the only acceptable path. And before we close, let's address something crucial. The FBA mindset. This mindset has been one of division and counterproductivity. FBAs are not Pan-Africanists. They do and say anything to undermine the movement for black liberation. They take credit for things they did not contribute to, and their negativity and selfishness have consistently held us back. It was an FBA who betrayed the Honorable Marcus Garvey and worked with the system to bring him down.
Garvey was betrayed by the few people he trusted to get the Black Star Line afloat. The man he asked to inspect the Yarmouth turned out to be an informant for J. Edgar Hoover. And his hand-picked captain, Joshua Coburn, convinced Garvey to pay 6 times what the ship was worth, and then took a kickback from the purchase price. Yet Garvey quickly raised and spent $200,000 on 2 more ships.
And making the purchase of those liners without being led by experts. He was deceived about the condition of those ships and overpaid for on what their value should have been. It was a disaster for the movement and turned out to be a disaster for Mr. Garvey.
It was FBAs who snitched Nate Parker's slave revolution. FBAs killed Malcolm X. And it was FBAs that Harriet Tubman had to keep a bullet ready for to prevent them from jeopardizing her missions. It is more than likely that FBAs played a role in the setup of Martin Luther King's death. So yes, let's give FBAs all the credit they deserve for consistently undermining black upliftment and progress. These weren't the ones in the marches or facing dogs and batons. They stayed home, or worse, actively worked against the movement. In honor of Marcus Garvey, I find it my duty to expose this mindset for the fraud it is. We owe it to his legacy and to the future of black liberation to call out and reject the forces that hold us back. Marcus Garvey's legacy calls for unity, pride, and action. Let's honor his name by continuing the fight he started. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, make sure you like, subscribe, and share. And stay tuned for another episode of What is Going On Media, where we make the complicated clear.